Hey, so glad you're here this weekend. If you have your Bible, and I hope you do, open up to Matthew chapter 5. We're continuing our series called Summer on the Mount. We're studying our way verse by verse through what I think is the best and most impactful sermon that's ever been preached, which we know as the Sermon on the Mount. 5 weeks ago, we went up on a hillside with Jesus, and he sat down and started to teach. And what I want you to know this morning before you go any further is he wants this teaching to land in a different place than where you might expect. And it was definitely a different place than where the Jewish people in his day expected. You see, he doesn't want this to land on a stone tablet that you carve and hang in a museum or carry around with you and try not to break it. But he wants this stuff, this teaching, to be etched on your heart so that it begin to change who you are and how you live from the inside out, the way you treat people, the way you love people. It changes how you act. But right there, I need to stop, and I just want to bring us back before we go any further today. And I want to bring you back to the warning I've given you every week of this series so far, and that is this. The minute we start talking about the way we behave, we can forget the gospel in about 2 seconds. And what I mean is, we tend to put activity before identity, and so we start to think things like, okay, if I obey God enough, if I'm good enough, if, maybe I can earn his love and approval and I'll be worthy of something, but that is not the gospel. The gospel is simply this: when you experience the grace of Jesus in its fullness, it changes everything. And then you're not living and acting to try to earn Christ's love, but you're acting out of obedience because you already have it. You've already been accepted, and your identity precedes your activity. That is the heart of everything that Jesus is teaching in this sermon. So I got to be honest with you on that note, that what he teaches that we're going to study today, it gets a little personal. It gets right up in our faces again, just like what Rob taught last week. It gets right up in our faces, and Jesus is going to challenge us to think differently about some things that are not easy to think differently about. See, if you missed last week, then you missed kind of the first taste of how tough this teaching in the Sermon on the Mount can be, because Rob, he preached about stuff like murder and adultery, but he preached about anger and lust and our oath, our word, and these other challenging things. The first 4 out of 6 statements Jesus makes where he takes some old teaching and he's like, you've heard it said this way, but I tell you this. Rob touched on the first 4. And when Jesus, you put yourself in the people's shoes, when Jesus said to the people, hey, you've heard it said, don't murder, everybody leaned in and they went, okay, finally something we can say, all right, I've never killed anybody. I can do this, Jesus, great. But then he goes on and he's like, but I tell you, if you have any hatred or anger in your heart toward a person, it's like you've already murdered them. And everybody leaned back out and said, okay, I'm out. Because who hasn't been angry? Or who hasn't at some point thought to yourself, I think I hate that person? Like, we've all been in that place. And he goes on and he does that with other things. And it's this challenging teaching that kind of makes you feel like I can never measure up to this. I'm immediately disqualified. But see, the problem and the reason this is such tough teaching is because we tend to think of these things like they're behavior issues. And what Jesus is trying to help us understand is these aren't behavior issues, these are heart issues. And what he's looking for isn't simply behavior modification, but a change of heart. What we do matters, but the motivation behind what we do matters even more. And that's why Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 5:14, he said, for Christ's love, your Bible might say controls, but if it's like the version I grew up with, it says Christ's love compels us. Well, what's he talking about? This is speaking to motives, right? It's not that I should be compelled or controlled or driven by my ego or my pride or my reputation or my ambition or my desires, my selfishness, my anger, my lust, anything else. I shouldn't be driven or compelled or controlled by those things. He says it's the love of Christ that compels me. It's understanding I don't have to earn that love, but I've already got it. And so that compels me to live different than I probably lived before and different than everybody else. And so it's not behavior modification, it's identity preceding activity. That's why week 1, I love that Jesus said, you are, before he said, do this. And then he goes on, Paul, in this passage in 2 Corinthians, and he's like, for Christ's love controls us, or Christ's love compels us. Why? Because we're convinced that one died for all. Jesus died for all of us and everyone else. And he died so that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. So last week, Jesus starts working us through these 6 statements, right? We touched on the first 4, but today we're going to touch on the last 2. And I think these are the 2 toughest. And you'll see what I mean as we dive into it. Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to start in verse 38. This is what he says. You've heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, don't resist an evil person. If somebody slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you're sued in court and your shirt's taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. So let's break this down, okay? Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Who's heard that before? Okay, almost all of us, you've heard that before. If you ever wondered where that came from, it's Old Testament law. Now Jesus is bringing it back up right here. But here's what you got to understand about this. This was a law to rule a nation. This was not a personal law to govern like how you do Thanksgiving dinner at your house with your aunt that makes everybody mad, okay? See, Jesus is quoting Deuteronomy 19. And what he's quoting here is really a testament to how much he's changed the world, because we hear eye for eye and tooth for tooth, and we can think that's kind of harsh, but in Jesus' day, they would have heard that and they would have thought, wow, really, that's it? Like this was kind of a merciful thing. See, human nature doesn't do eye for eye. Let's be honest, here's what we do. We do eye for eye plus one. So you slap me, I punch you. You stab me, I shoot you. You say something mean about me in a text, I screenshot it and rally all my friends and I bring receipts and we're gonna have it out, right? And we do eye for eye plus one, and this is how it worked in Jesus' day. This is how petty insults become riots and small crimes become wars. I mean, this is how it worked back in the days when Israel was a freshly freed, formerly slave nation that now they're trying to learn how to self-govern and survive without wiping each other out. And so God gave them this rule to keep them from spiraling out of control. It's like, okay, you poked my eye out, I'm not gonna wipe out your whole family, because that's kind of how they did things. And so this was a law that God gave to limit violence, not to license it, all right? But the religious people took this rule that was meant to be merciful, and they did what they do. They started messing with it, and they turned it into a permit for a vendetta, and their justification was, I'm just doing to him what he did to me, or I'm just doing to her what she did to me. And Jesus is saying, no, we're not gonna do it like that. So as far as it depends on you personally, don't go seeking revenge at all. He goes on, he says, if someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek too. I've got to be honest with you. I had to dig into this one because this is not my natural response. I mean, you could try it out in the lobby and we'll see how it goes. But I'm not a person, if you slap me in the cheek, I'm going to naturally say, hey, you missed a spot, try the other side, right? And you're probably not either. We don't typically think that way. And some of this, it's just basic human reaction, but I think there's something else going on here, okay? And here's what I think is happening. It's that revenge feels good, doesn't it? I mean, I know we're at church and we're supposed to be like good people here, at least while we're in the building. You're gonna walk out the door and do your thing, but like we're supposed to act like we have it all together in here, aren't we? Let's be honest though, doesn't revenge feel good? My 7-year-old daughter Ellie's super into board games right now, and she loves to play the game of life. Anybody ever play the game of life before? It's that game that you get a little car and you put your person in it and you go around the board for about 7 hours, or at least it feels that way. And every time you spin, the thing jams, then you have to spin 6 more times to get it to go around. And this girl, I am telling you, I've never seen anybody with the ability to land on every space around the board that says revenge. And she laughs every single time. She loves to take my money or send me back 10 spaces. She thinks it's so much fun. And let's be honest, if you've ever been hurt by somebody, you do too, don't you? Revenge feels good, man. When you get even with somebody who's hurt you, it's like scratching the worst kind of itch. There's just something about it that's satisfying. And so it's a serious struggle for us to think about. Jesus is saying, don't go get revenge, but well, let's break this down a little bit. Let's figure out what he's talking about here. First of all, does he mean you can never defend yourself? Is that what this is talking about? Somebody hurts you, you can't defend yourself, you just take it and ask for more? It's actually not what he's talking about. You see, Jesus is talking about insults, not attacks, and here's what I'm talking about. Okay, watch this. He says, if somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other also, okay? Now let's get real practical. If you're standing in front of me, I'm right-handed, and in Jesus' day, most people were, still the majority, but it was kind of a cultural thing then. If I'm gonna slap you on the right cheek, how am I gonna do that? I've gotta backhand you. That's not an attack, man, that's an insult. And what Jesus is saying here is, if somebody's gonna come at you like that, figuratively more than literally, but if they're gonna come at you like that, if they insult your reputation, your ego, your pride, whatever, instead of trying to get even, take it like a grown-up. And what you do by turning the other cheek is you say, I'm not gonna let you treat me like a child. I'm going to have more dignity than you, and if you want to treat me that way, you're the one who's going to look foolish, but I will not retaliate and match you at that level. So he's saying, no, be more mature than that. This isn't weakness, guys. When you think about it this way, this is actually strength. This is self-control, and this is somebody who's so secure in who they are, but specifically in this case, secure in who they are in Christ, that they say, I don't have to get down on that level. Okay, it's not a fist fight, it's an insult, and insults aren't going to move me. But now hear me clearly, because some people take this teaching and they run off a cliff with it. What Jesus is not saying here is that we have to stand idly by while somebody beats us up. He's not saying that it's not about pacifism in the face of active violence, and that's how some people read this, but that's not what he's talking about in this passage. He's not telling you that you just have to take it. He's not forbidding self-defense. He's not telling you to do nothing while somebody hurts your family. In fact, later in the New Testament, Paul tells Timothy that somebody who will not protect and provide for their family is worse than an unbeliever. So what's that mean? If you come after my family, what it means is I'll pray for you to heal quickly and learn some lessons. But he's not saying that you have to take an attack. He's talking about something very different. Okay, he's talking about insults, when somebody runs their mouth about you online. And you're thinking to yourself, this isn't even true. The things they're saying, it's not even true. They're telling flat out lies, right? What he's saying is respond differently. But maybe what you do is you remember how this whole Sermon on the Mount started, because just a few verses ago at the beginning of chapter 5, Jesus said this, blessed are you when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you, when they say all kinds of wicked and evil things about you. They call you names, they lie. When they do that because of me, Jesus says, blessed are you, rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. So when you jump up to defend yourself, I think you need to ask a pretty crucial question, you and me both, and that is, what am I defending? Like, am I defending God? Am I defending my faith? Am I defending my family? Or is this about my pride, my ego, my reputation? Because if that's what it's about, Jesus says, no, that's not how we're going to roll. And then he goes on. He says, if you are sued for your shirt, give your coat too. And if a soldier makes you carry their gear 1 mile, carry it 2. In those days, a Roman soldier could be walking down the street and pick out any Jewish citizen and just be like, hey, you carry my stuff. And so you had to carry their pack, their helmet, their armor, their sword, and you had to carry it. You were legally bound and obligated to carry it for 1 mile. And Jesus is saying, yeah, I know that's what you're legally bound and obligated to, but I want you to go 2 miles. If you've ever heard the saying, go the extra mile, this is where it comes from, okay? Now, put yourself again in the people's shoes. We have to do this. They hate the Romans. The Romans are oppressive. They're mean. They needlessly beat and abuse and slaughter the Jewish people. And so they're like, Jesus, I don't even want to carry it 1 mile. And you're telling me out of my own goodwill, I'm supposed to go 2 miles? But that's exactly what he's saying. And so here's what he's getting at. The person he's describing here who turns the other cheek, gives their coat when all they have to give up is their shirt, goes the 2nd mile, that is not a weak person. It's a very strong person. They are the one and only person in this exchange who is in control, and they have so much grace in them that they can give you more than you asked for and more than you deserve, and they can do it with a smile on their face. That's strength. It's somebody that's like somebody else is trying to take something from you, and instead of letting them have it, in a sense, I mean, you are, but they discover they can't really take anything from you because you've already decided you're going to live by Paul's words in Romans chapter 12. This is what he wrote. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So when somebody tries to do something evil, something to harm you, something that doesn't seem fair, Paul says, man, do the illogical thing and overcome that evil with good. That kind of response is unbeatable because you're not going to let somebody who wants to harm you call all the shots, and they kind of hate it, so it's still fun. So overcome evil with good. It's the way that you win in an argument, okay? Now let me slow down. I want to get a little personal because I'm mostly preaching to myself with this when you guys just get to listen. And here's what I mean. Andy Stanley in his book, Enemies of the Heart, talks about these heart conditions. And one of the things he talks about is anger. And he says something we have to process here. He says in this book, show me an angry person and I'll show you a hurt person. And what he's getting at is that the root of most of our anger comes from hurt. It's that somebody's done something to us or taken something from us, and now we perceive a debt that somebody owes us, okay? So maybe it's your reputation. It could be your family. It could be your best years. Maybe somebody took your first marriage from you. Maybe somebody stole your purity from you. Maybe somebody took your family away from you. It could be a raise you earned but you never got. second chance nobody gave you. I don't know what it is. But the trap is this: even when the debt is legitimate, and you have every good reason in the world to perceive it as a debt, somebody truly owes you something, even if you're right, that anger still ends up owning you and me. And that's what Jesus wants us to understand, is that anger is a trap. And so what happens to a lot of us is we just live at a low-grade simmer all the time. And some of you don't even know it's you, but people come up to you and they're like, hey, what's wrong? And you're like, nothing. I guess it's just my face, You think to yourself, it's not going to boil over, but eventually we all do. And so if I could just have an honest confession moment, because I never want you to think I'm up here preaching this stuff at you like I have it all together. A couple of weeks ago, I had a night like this where some stuff happened in our house that just set me off. And instead of diffusing the situation and backing away and doing what Jesus is talking about here, I let my anger and my words get the best of me. And one of the worst fights that Ashley and I have ever had in our marriage happened just a couple of weeks ago because I did not manage my anger in that situation the right way. And I just tell you that because, I need this sermon as bad as anybody does. I don't have all this stuff figured out, and a lot of you don't either. And so if you're like me, then you have to ask a question here. And the question is, then what do we do with our anger? If these are the things we're supposed to do and they're so illogical, they're so hard to do, and we're not supposed to do what we want to do, then, okay, Jesus, then what? Here's what the New Testament says. Paul writes, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, just like Jesus. Okay, there were times where he got angry, but when he's flipping tables in the temple, it's not just because somebody cut him off in traffic on the way up the hill, right? There's a different kind of anger. There's a holy anger, and sometimes I want to look at Christians, if I could just be honest with you, and I want to say, if you're not getting mad about any of the things that made Jesus mad, are you even a follower of Jesus? Some things warrant a little bit of anger, but there's a difference between that kind of righteous, holy anger and just blowing up all the time. And so here's the move. The move is don't react, because to react is just to act as you've been acted upon. It's like you're a puppet and whoever hurt you is holding the strings. And Jesus is saying, no, don't do that. Don't react, respond, because a response indicates self-control. And it indicates a level-headedness, and it indicates a little bit of patience and calculation. And that's the way that Jesus always responded. See, you know what God did when my sin made him angry, when my rebellion made him angry? Instead of reacting the way he could have or probably should have, instead what he did was respond by sending Jesus to die in my place. And that's the standard of grace that we're supposed to look up to, which is a crazy high standard, right? That's an impossibly high standard. So if you want to be like a Pharisee, fine, make a list and check it twice. But for those of us who want to be more like Jesus and we have that model of grace to look up to, what that means is we forgive because we've been forgiven. And that's what forgiven people do, man. They forgive. That's what he asks us to do. I read a book a while back, and in this book, this guy talks about a time when he was just totally betrayed, like knife in the back betrayal from a coworker. And he's writing about how he wanted to get revenge so badly, and he even had opportunities, but he made up his mind that whatever it took, he was going to obey this teaching of Jesus, no matter how bad things got, no matter how the other guy responded. And I love what he wrote about how he changed the circumstances in his own life. Here's how he described it. He said, I clenched my fist, gritted my teeth, and I began praying for him. And then the strangest thing started to happen. I discovered you can't pray for somebody and go on hating them. Let me say that again. I discovered you can't pray for somebody and go on hating them. He continued to write, my hatred turned to tolerance, my tolerance turned to understanding, my understanding turned to compassion, my compassion turned to forgiveness, and my forgiveness turned to love. No, we never did become close friends, but I forgave him, and he was no longer my enemy. Now, I want you to catch the first step, okay, because this is it, and it's not an easy one, but the first step was a closed-fisted, gritted teeth prayer for blessing for somebody that he really just wanted to go get even with. I mean, how hard is that, right? I'm sure he didn't feel like it, but here's the deal. You don't have to feel it. You just have to do it. You just have to do it. You can't sincerely pray for somebody, especially pray for their good, and continue to hate them. Those two things can't live in the same heart. It's not possible. And listen, forgiveness is a command, okay? It's something Jesus expects of me. It's something he expects of you. And I know how hard that is, but it is an expectation. But I need to just make sure we're clear on the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, because forgiveness is one way. If I hurt you, you can forgive me even if I never say I'm sorry. It might be hard, probably is, but it's possible. Reconciliation requires two people. It requires repentance on your part and my part. And somebody may have hurt you that they'll never say they're sorry. Maybe somebody's hurt you and you can't reconcile even if you wanted to. Maybe the person who hurt you is dead and gone. Reconciliation may not be possible, but forgiveness is always possible because it just requires your heart posture to change. And here's the way that Paul describes this in the book of Romans chapter 12. He says, so far as it depends on you, live at peace with everybody. So you handle your side. You lay down the rock, even if the other person never lays theirs down. And some of you, I just got to say, man, you're sitting in a prison of unforgiveness today. And your anger, your bitterness, that's the warden in your prison. And meanwhile, Jesus is in the door of your prison cell going, man, the gate's been opened and you're just sitting there. And he wants you to drop your rock and get up and walk out of that prison. Well, then he takes it up one more level. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 5. This is verse 43. He says, you've heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you'll be acting as true children of your Father in heaven, for he gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and unjust alike. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there for that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that. If you're only kind to your friends, how are you different than anybody else? Even pagans do that. But you are to be perfect. Now we're all out, right? You're to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now watch this. Jesus does something different here than he does with the first 5 of these 6 statements, because in the first 5, he's quoting the Old Testament, and those were commands God actually gave. Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, all those things. God said that stuff. But what Jesus is doing right here is he's quoting from Leviticus 19. And if you go back and you look at Leviticus 19:18, what God says is, love your neighbor, period. There's no second part to that. It's just, love your neighbor and pray for those who persecute you. But here's what the religious people did. Because again, we're back to this principle where they take something and they twist it all around. So what they did is they took love your neighbor and they kind of changed it to say love only your neighbor. And then eventually the second part got added where it was like love your neighbor and hate whoever you don't want to love. If they're not your neighbor, don't love them. And here's how they did it. They asked one sneaky little question. And the question was, okay, so who's my neighbor? And the way they decided to define neighbor was it's anybody who looks like me, anybody who thinks like me, anybody who votes like me, behaves like me, believes like me. I don't know, fill in the gap with whatever you want. And what they arrived on was for a first century Jewish person, the only person who qualified as a neighbor was another first century Jewish person, and everybody else was fair game to hate. But Jesus shows up on the scene. He says, no, it's not going to be that way anymore. Let's go back to Leviticus. Let's get it right. He's like, love your neighbor, pray for those who persecute you. End of story. There is no part about hate in here. God didn't say that. I'm not saying it either. Jesus is saying you got to get that out of your brains. Love your enemy, pray for those who persecute you. And I promise you, somebody in the crowd that day was thinking the same thing you or I would have been thinking. When Jesus said that, we'd have been saying, okay, Jesus, I'll pray for him. God, drop a mountain on him. That counts, right? A small one's good. No, Jesus is saying, pray good over them. That's how you start to love somebody the way that he does. And I want to be clear about the kind of love he's talking about, because the word, see, we lose stuff in the translation. We say this all the time. When you look at the original language and you look at English, we lose stuff in there. The word Jesus uses in the New Testament is agape. And that is the highest and noblest form of love. That's the word that's used all through the Bible to describe the kind of love that God has for me and for you. It's not a romantic love. It's not a feeling based on circumstances or your behavior or my behavior, but it's the kind of love that always chooses what's best for somebody else, regardless of what they do to you or how they act or how they respond or how they receive it or whether they deserve it or not. Agape love is different. And you can only fully understand that kind of love when you think about it through the lens of the cross, because man, to go to a cross to die for people who are your enemies, and that's what Paul says we were when Jesus went to the cross. He's like, you were God's enemies. Think about that. Would you die for an enemy willingly? The only thing that would lead you to do that is the kind of love that Jesus is talking about here. This agape love is true love. So here's what this brings us to. This is kind of the bottom line question. Why would we do this? Why would we love people who are so hard to love, people who actively work against us? Why would we love people willingly who want the worst for us? What would cause us to do that? Jesus answers that question. He gives us the reason in verse 45. He says, you do that so you'll be acting as true children of your Father in heaven. He goes on and he says, God sends sunshine on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust. He's good to people who curse him every single day. Theologians call that common grace. Jesus is just saying, hey, kids, be like your dad. Children imitate their parents, right? Do what your father does. Don't react. Respond. And then he drops the bar all the way to the floor in verse 46 when he says, if you love only the people who love you, what reward is there in that? Even corrupt tax collectors love people like that, people who love them. And I want you to keep in mind, who's writing this? We're in the book of Matthew, right? You know he wrote it because his name's right there. We're in the book of Matthew, okay? What was Matthew? Before Jesus found him, before Jesus called him, he was a tax collector. He's the most hated guy in town. He was working for the Romans, profiting off the back of his own people. Everybody hated tax collectors, and they were corrupt. And so when Jesus said that, it stung Matthew a little bit. And later, when he sat back down to put pen to paper to write this down so we could read it today, it stung again. But he had to be honest. He must have known, yeah, when I was a tax collector, it was easy to love people who loved me. That's the easy part. That's just math. Anybody can do that. But if you're taking notes today, here's what I want you to take home with you. This is our thought for the day. Anybody can love the unlovable, or can love the lovable. Okay, now let me get it right. If you're taking notes, erase what I just said, okay? Let's try again. Anybody can love the lovable. That part's easy. Jesus calls us to something deeper, a supernatural love. And don't miss that word, supernatural. We're going to talk about that. A supernatural love that looks foolish, but it changes the world. It's a radical kind of love. It's the kind of love that causes you to love people who can't stand you, and you don't really like them either. But you know what Jesus was so good at? Was loving people. And because of that, people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus, and he liked them too. And that kind of love, or even just like, is not really human. It requires God. It requires strength. It's not ours. See, in verse 48, Jesus, he just points that right out. He says, you are to be what? Perfect, man. You're to be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Okay, there's the trap door. Now we're all out. Okay, nobody's perfect. We talk about this all the time. Only Jesus was perfect. So now we're all out. And Jesus himself looks at us in the face and he's like, okay, you are to be perfect. What's he mean by this? Again, this is where we lose some stuff. Because the Greek word for perfect is teleos. And that's not talking about being morally flawless. Jesus isn't saying you can never make a mistake. What that word teleos means is complete or whole or full. And so he's saying to us, man, love people with the kind of full love that your Father in heaven loves you with. That's a different kind of love. And so here's the whole thing in 2 sentences, all right? The whole thing in 2 sentences is if you're hearing all this stuff we've been preaching about the last few weeks and you're thinking to yourself, I got it, you could not be more wrong, you don't got it. And that's the point. But if you're hearing all this and you're thinking to yourself, I don't have a prayer, okay, that's perfect. Now you are in the position to do the one thing that Jesus has wanted from you all along, and that is every single day to hand the keys of your life over to him and say, Jesus, I need you to run this show because I'm not very good at it, but you are. You are. That's what he was talking about when he said, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You are now perfectly positioned. If you realize you don't have a prayer of getting this right on your own, you are perfectly positioned for Jesus to do what only he can do in your life. And to let him run things and do it better than you can do it. Because see, God responded to me, did not react, but he responded to me so differently than what I deserved. Because when my sin and my rebellion stirred up his anger against me, he could have smited me. And some of us think God is like that, like he's this cosmic killjoy that's waiting for us to make a misstep or do something wrong. And he's like, ha, gotcha. And he could, but he doesn't. When I gave him every reason to walk away from me, he said, I will never leave you. And when I was unfaithful to him, he was faithful to me. And when I slapped the face of God Almighty with my sin, he loved me into his family instead of sending me away. That's who he is. And so look, if you're thinking to yourself, this kind of love Jesus is asking me to have for people is not fair. I don't want to do this. It's beyond just not easy. It's just not fair. If somebody does something so wrong to me, I should be able to get even, right? I don't like this. The answer is no, you're exactly right. It's not fair. It's probably reckless, definitely messy, But this is what Jesus did so well, is he ran straight toward the messes that everybody else ran away from. And the story that always comes to mind for me is John chapter 8, one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible, about this woman who was kind of set up by the religious leaders. They went and they snatched her out of bed when she was in bed with a guy she wasn't married to. They drag her naked into the street. Just put yourself in her shoes. How humiliating is that? They drag her through town naked. They throw her down in front of Jesus. And she's covering her face in shame, and they look at Jesus and they say, okay, let's see what you do with this one. The law says that she should not walk away. We should kill her right here on the spot. But we want to know what you think. And I love what Jesus does. He gets down in the dirt and he starts to draw, and I think what he's doing is trying to take every eye off of her and put him on himself, and that's the first way he shows her mercy. And then he looks up at him and he says, okay, guys, if you want to do this, we can do this. I see the rocks in your hands. You want to play the judgment game? We can. So how about this? Any one of you who is sinless, you go first. And one by one, the rocks start to hit the dirt. Started with the oldest people first, because older folks, you're smarter than the rest of us, right? They thought, we don't want to pick a judgment fight with the judge who knows everything. And so here's this woman on the ground waiting for the rocks to start flying, covering her head, expecting this is the end. She does not think she's living beyond this moment. And then at some point, she looks up, and there is one face left. And it's not the Pharisees, and it's not people from town. It's just Jesus. And you know my favorite part of this story? He says to her, okay, where'd they go? Where are your accusers? Where are all the people? And now think about this, okay? Her response is, nobody accuses me, they're gone. Who's left? It's her and Jesus. What did he say? If you've never sinned, you get to throw the first stone. There was exactly one person in that crowd who had the right to get in her face and say, yes, you deserve to die for this. And he was the one. I don't even know if she knew who he was at this point, but something in her knew when she's face to face with Jesus, she knew right there in the moment, he doesn't accuse me. How cool is that? What's that say about Jesus? He says, who accuses you? She's like, nobody. They're gone. It's just you and me. And Jesus says, yeah, then neither do I accuse you. And then he says, go, but he doesn't stop there, because if he did, that wouldn't be love. It'd just be a hall pass right back into the same sin cycle that she was already caught in. He's like, go and sin no more. And there's this picture I can't get out of my mind. It's a picture that I love. In fact, I had a literal picture of this as the wallpaper on my computer that looks like this. I love this picture that Jesus runs toward this mess that everybody else would run away from, but this is just who he is. It's love that doesn't make any sense. It's reckless, but it's beautiful. So let me get real practical as we wrap up. I have a friend who's an old retired pastor, and he told me one time there are three kinds of preachers. There are preachers that just want you to know stuff, and so they'll teach you history lessons and fill your head with knowledge, and that's it. And I don't want to be that guy. And then there are feel preachers. They want you to feel all warm and fuzzy, and you come in and you get inspired, and then you run out and you feel great. But then there's a third kind of preacher. You have no, feel, and do, and that's me, okay? Every time you guys come in here on a Sunday, I want you to leave with something practical that you can put in your pocket and use in your life. And so here it is. If you're taking notes, this is the practical stuff. So you've had a name in your mind for about 20 minutes now. The first time I said love your enemies, you thought of that person. When I talked about loving people who are hard to love, somebody who's done something wrong, somebody who's said something hurtful, somebody who's taken something from you, you thought of that person. You know who they are. The face came to mind. I don't have to tell you who they are. It's the person that owes you in some way. It's the one you've been doing eye for eye plus one with for years, even if it's only been in your head. You've been playing that game. So here's what you do. 3 things, and they're easy. They're not easy, but they're simple. But you don't even have to wait till you're in the parking lot to do step number 1, and that's this. Pray for them. Pray for them. Clenched fist and all, if you have to. Remember, you can't pray for somebody's good and go on hating them at the same time. So ask God to bless them. Do it every day for a week and see what happens in your heart in just a week. God's going to start to change things, so pray for them. Number 2, drop your rock. You don't have a right to throw it anyway, but drop your rock and forgive them. It's one way, and it's a command and expectation. It does not require them to apologize or repent, but it will set you free. And you have to understand, that's why Jesus wants it for you. It's not to tell you to just get over it, but it's that he doesn't want you to be caught in that prison of bitterness and anger. So stop carrying the debt. Let God be the judge so that you can be free. And don't wait for the apology that might never come. But lay the rock down. And number 3, go 1 mile further than they deserve. What that might look like in your life this week is whoever that person is, you think of one crazy, ridiculous, gospel-shaped act that you can do for that person that makes no sense except that Jesus is real and you're taking him at his word here, and then go do that thing. Overcome evil with good in some way this week between you and whoever that person is. Go the extra mile. And now let me end with the thing that I want you to hear more than anything else before you walk out. If you're sitting here feeling beat up by the stuff that we've looked at the last few weeks, like Jesus is up in your face, it's not my intention to beat you up, and it's not the Holy Spirit's intention to beat you up, but if you're feeling conviction, that conviction is an invitation from God to say, no, I don't expect perfection from you. But remember, we talked about this supernatural kind of help that we get. It only comes from him. And if you're trying to do it on your own, it's never going to work. I'm just telling you right now, it will not work. But the invitation is to run to him because there is more grace in Jesus than there ever will be sin or anger or bitterness in you. So you can come to him, and you need to come to him because there's an enemy that wants you to spend your whole life justifying your behavior, but Jesus wants to justify you once and for all before a God who is holy, and he does it not based on your merit or your actions or your ability to perform according to some standard, but he did the work when he went to the cross. See, this is love. It's not that we got our act together and loved God, but it's that he loved us first when he had no reason to. And he sent his son as payment for our sin, to live the perfect life that we couldn't live and to die the death that we deserve to die. And if you believe in Jesus, that when he died on that cross and came out of the tomb, that somehow it counted for you, then you get adopted as a child of God and you get to be clothed in his righteousness. And just like that woman in the dirt, when he looks at you, he doesn't see your dirt and he doesn't see your shame and your nakedness and your mistakes, your past, but instead, he sees a person made in his image and clothed in the righteousness of Christ. And that's what he offers you for free. It's just grace. And it's possible because of what he did for you on the cross. And so just like we have every Sunday this summer so far, we're going to wrap up with communion. On your way in today, if you're on campus, somebody handed you one of these. And if you're online, hopefully you have some juice or a piece of bread or a cracker you can participate with. This is just a symbolic moment, but it has so much meaning because you see this little piece of bread represents Jesus' body that he gave for you. And the juice in this cup represents his blood that he shed for you, not just to cover over your sin today, but to give you the promise of eternity with him. And it's possible because he loves you when he didn't have to. When you were his enemy, he loved you first. So stop trying to outperform him and accept the fact that you can't do it on your own, and let him help. Maybe in this moment, before you take these things, this is where you start to pray for that person. But let God help you make the change. And then you'll get to experience what it's like to live a life that is truly set free. Not because you have to earn forgiveness, but because you've already been forgiven.